Welcome to the Ballot Brief, a podcast series of interviews with Democratic gubernatorial candidates ahead of the August 11th primary. First, I want to welcome our listeners and thank our media sponsor, Home Tech by Mosaic. I also want to thank our current guest, former Secretary of the Department of Administration and Democratic gubernatorial primary candidate, Joel Brennan. Joel, thank you very much for taking the time to talk with us and engage directly with what matters to our business community.
Thanks for having me on here. Happy to be here again.
Absolutely. And first, I'd like to start with a disclaimer that at no point in this series are we endorsing candidates. We just want to be supportive of policies that equip our region with the resources we need to support business and sustain our inevitable growth. So first, I want to start kind of with a broader question to get a feel for your priorities. What, in your view, is the biggest challenge the Eau Claire business community is facing currently?
Well, I've had the chance to sit here and have conversations with you and Dave Miner and people from the business community here. And I think it's a number of things. I think one of the challenges that Eau Claire has that's different than other parts of the state is how to manage growth. Like, this is a part of the state that is growing, and other parts of the state are facing shrinking opportunity. And this is one where the idea of intentionality around business growth is one of the things I think that Eau Claire is dealing with. And so that becomes a matter of how do you deal with issues like childcare that I know you guys have dealt with here in the business community. It's about housing and what are you doing to ensure that there's the right kind of growth in housing. So it's those things and those are good problems to have in some ways. They're better than if you're in a part of the state where population continues to shrink or where you're challenged for bringing in businesses. So those are the things I think that the community is wrestling with. Now, at the other end of the spectrum, I know there have been significant losses in healthcare delivery. There were hospitals that closed in the last couple of years here, and that's an issue that no matter where you go around the state is one that is on everybody's mind. But it's been especially pertinent here in the Chippewa Valley because of some of the hospitals and the clinics that have closed over the last couple of years. So, I think that's what I have heard in my several trips here, both as a candidate, but also even going back to when I served as Secretary of Administration, kind of what was on the minds of businesses and on the minds of people here in this community.
Right. As you mentioned, healthcare, affordability, and housing are all at the top of the list, at the top of mind here. Things also like education, energy, and workforce is also super important to our business community. So those are some of the topics that we'll touch on throughout this interview. So what about your background? You mentioned being the former Secretary of the Department of Administration. What about your background sets you apart from other candidates in this race and understanding or presenting solutions for these problems that you've mentioned?
And all the other candidates in this race I would consider friends on the Democratic side and people who I've worked with, many of them, over the course of my career. The distinction that I bring is over the last 2 decades, I really have had nothing but executive decision-making experience. And that means doing that in the nonprofit sector, doing it in government, doing it with businesses. I have taken a leave from an organization not too dissimilar to the one that we're at here. I run an organization called the Greater Milwaukee Committee that I've done for the last 4 years in Milwaukee, where it's a group, it's a membership organization where it's business leaders, the CEOs of top companies, nonprofit leaders, the heads of the higher education institutions coming together to solve problems. And so if there's a distinction that I offer that's different than serving in the legislature, different than one of 33 in the state Senate or one of 99 in the Assembly or having a job where you really don't have a lot of defined duties, it's that I have been in executive roles, including as the top appointee for Governor Evers in his cabinet as the Secretary of Administration, and doing that during very challenging times for us as a state. About 75% of the time that I was there, we were navigating our way through COVID, which was a time almost unlike any other in the last 100 years in the state of Wisconsin. So I do believe that those are the types of things and the decisions that I've had to make and the approach that I have taken about being a problem solver rather than just being an ideologue or just being in things to get even with people or to try to stand up against what somebody else stands for. I have truly been somebody who has, over the course of a career, demonstrated that I'm focused and committed to solving problems, and we got plenty of them in Wisconsin. You got some here in this community, and we got plenty of them in Wisconsin that we need to face. And so that's the essence of why I'm running and what I think sets me apart from others in the field.
Yeah. So aside from your experience differences, what policy would you say that sets you apart from other candidates in the race? Like what different view do you have than them?
Yeah, and I think we share a lot of similar views on the issues that are most important. I think you'd hear every one of us say that affordability is the biggest challenge, and it's no matter whether you're in an urban or a rural setting, no matter where you are, whatever region of the state. An area that I've really tried to focus in on that I think is one that hampers growth and hampers who we could be as a state is around housing. Here in Eau Claire, I was here a few weeks ago. It wasn't one of the times that I've been here at the chamber to talk to you guys, but I was here a few weeks ago to talk to some local elected leaders, and they were telling me that I think I'm going to get this stat right, that about a quarter of the homeowners in Eau Claire are individuals. So it's one person living in a home, and so you have a marketplace here where young families probably they can't get the supply that they need. There are challenges for them to get into that first home. Mm-hmm. But then you've got baby boomers who are sitting on 3 or 4 bedrooms, and if they were to leave that home and downsize, they're going to be paying a 7% mortgage rate where they're paying like 3% now. So one of the things that I have said is, using the tools that we have at the Wisconsin Housing and Economic Development Authority, I would create a 3% mortgage if you're a first-time home buyer and you meet the qualifications, but also if you're a baby boomer and if you're somebody who's been in your home for a long time, because you need some incentive or some opportunity to downsize and move out. So, trying to do those things where we're taking a marketplace that has that's really stuck in lots of ways and doing something to try to move it. The other thing that I've said around housing is laying out a marker that over the course of my 4 years in office, we would create 100,000 new kind of starter homes or entry-level homes for people. And those aren't $500,000 homes. They're not $600,000 homes. And there are plenty of those that are coming into Wisconsin. But those that a family with 2 incomes or a family that's just starting out where they can afford for $250,000 or $300,000 and having the state play a role in those. So that's an area I think that, if we're going to end up having the economic growth that we want to have as a state, we need to make sure that all the building blocks are in place. Some of that's around healthcare, some of that's around education, but really housing is one of the areas that's a root cause of some of the challenges we have. And so I've tried to be very specific about some of the tools I think we have at our disposal to make progress on that issue.
Absolutely. Housing has definitely been a priority of Eau Claire's, of an issue to solve. As you mentioned, now we have people who are renting who are 65 and 70. We have a homelessness crisis in Eau Claire that are now on the street for the first time in their lives. They're retired and they're renting and facing these struggles for the first time, and that's not the community that we
it's not the community we want anywhere. And and here's a stat that you may already know. I know you're substantially younger than I am, but when I was 20 years old in 1990, the average age for a first-time homebuyer in Wisconsin and nationally was 28. In 2020, it was 33. Last year, it was 40. So over the course of a few years, it moved up that much. And we've got to be in a position where, homeownership isn't for everybody, but not having it as an option is something that hampers business. It kind of tears away at the fabric of society. It hurts our public education system, like everything about it, your own neighborhood, all of those things that cause people to invest and put down roots, like all those things are in jeopardy if we can't solve these things. And so that's kind of a root thing. And I also think this is kind of, if we're going to build the Wisconsin that we want, then these are the things that are kind of the hallmarks of doing it. I was able to, my wife and I, it was my birthday about 4 weeks ago, and we have come to the end of our mortgage payments. And as a birthday present to me and my family, I made the last payment on our mortgage in the house we've lived in for the last 20 years.
Congratulations.
And it may be the only time in my life, the only day in my life that I do that. But it is absolutely one of those days that you will never forget. But the idea that we're putting that out of reach for so many people here, or that somebody who's buying a home now who's 40 would have to be, paying for that for the next 30 years, like delaying retirement or paying into retirement, like that's not the Wisconsin I think that we all dream about, or the one we want to create. Like we've got to do some things to ensure that there's a better pathway for people.
Right. And in creating these solutions, as the leader of a purple state, as a Democrat, as a potential Democratic governor, how would you kind of govern under democratic principles, but also ensure that Republicans have a seat at the table, whether they maintain the majority in the Assembly and Senate or not?
Yeah, well, I mean, we're entering into a very different period of the political environment here in Wisconsin than we have had for the last 15 years. So, one of the most consequential elections in my lifetime was 2010. Scott Walker got elected governor. The Republicans won a majority in the state assembly and the state senate. They created maps that kind of built in a majority for them, a huge majority over the last 15 years. One of the great gifts that Tony Evers is leaving to Wisconsin are maps that look much more like the state. And so I'm working as much as I can. I was about to say my butt off, but I'm working as hard as I can to ensure that the Democrats take a majority in the state assembly and the state senate for the first time since 2010, and to have a Democratic governor. And I look forward to being able to govern in that way. But even if that's the case, it will be a 1 or 2 seat majority,
right,
and not what we have seen over the last 15 years. And it will require governing in a way that on this issue, maybe you have a couple different allies than you do on that issue. And you can't simply rely on your own party exclusively in order to get things done. And to be honest, if you look at the course of my career, the fact that I've worked with businesses, worked in the nonprofit sector, worked at the local level, which is, as you know, where the rubber meets the road and where partisanship kind of ends sometimes, where you have to plow roads and pick up garbage. Like, that's the area I think where I have worked in and where I'm excited about getting things done. It's about relationships. It's about, yes, I'm going to stand on my progressive principles, but I've got to put Wisconsin in a position where we can get things done and not just be about vengeance and grievance and so much of what we see that I think is so awful at the federal level. And if we decide we're going to do that, I think this is where public policy gets done. And I have had experience, when I was the Secretary of Administration during COVID, I spent a lot of my time talking to local elected officials, to county executives, to town board chairs, to mayors. And I never asked them, are you a Republican or a Democrat? Are you a conservative? Are you a progressive? I asked, what's going on the ground? How can we help? What is what tools do we have that the state has that can help you? Like, that's, I think, how you have to act and how you have to govern in times of crisis. In at least what passes as normal times now, like, that's the way you should be all of those times. So, like, that's the way that I'm going to approach being governor. I absolutely want to have a majority of the legislature that is of the same mind. But no matter what, it's going to be a very thin margin, and we're going to have to exercise muscles we haven't exercised in a long time in order to be able to get stuff done. And I think that what people fundamentally want out of government more than anything else is to see that they're getting something done, to see that we're responding to the challenges that are out there around affordability for healthcare, for housing, for education, making sure we're focused on getting results. Like, that's what they want.
Mm-hmm. And I kind of a follow-up question to that. So the recent failure of the surplus deal in Madison, I'm sure you were watching closely, it left some voters feeling ignored, as indicated by the Marquette poll. Apparently, four out of 5 Wisconsinites think that this surplus deal should have passed. As a former secretary of the Department of Administration, do you think that if this would have passed, it would have been an effective solution for Wisconsinites?
No. I don't. I think that we need to make sure we are focused on long-term solutions. And I'll tell you the challenges that I had with the proposed surplus agreement that the governor had with the legislature. First of all, we're coming up on June 30th, but the surplus that they envision is June 30th of next year. It would be, that there's an expectation that there's going to be $2.5 billion of extra money starting next June 30th. And we live in these really challenging times in a Trump economy where, I think lots of people have felt the challenges of inflation and gas prices over the first 6 months of this year. And I think we need to be very cautious about where things are going to stand next year. So I think that $2.5 billion it's not real yet. And I have I think, questions about whether we're going to realize all that. So having put together budgets and having been the Secretary of Administration, where I was ultimately responsible for the budget office and putting that together, that was my first concern about that I'm not sure that all that money is going to be there. I think we need to be cautious. The second concern I had is that the Legislative Fiscal Bureau said that if we laid out the money as was agreed to, that we're going to enter the next budget with about a $3 billion deficit. And that's not a recipe for being able to make long-term investments in public education and bringing down property taxes and creating opportunity for healthcare. I think those are the things when you peel back the layer of what lots of people thought was a great short-term deal. Like, there are long-term challenges. The final challenge that the thing that I thought was most challenging about it in terms of the $300 and $600 checks that were going to be going out to people around the state. There was about a third of the state that would get nothing. A third of the people, and those are people who are poor and they don't have any tax liability. Those are people who are living on Social Security because they don't pay taxes on that, or they don't file state taxes. Like, if you're doing something that's supposed to have some stimulating effect on the economy, the people who are going to spend that are the people who make the least and the people who are on fixed incomes. If everybody else is getting it and just putting it in their bank account or putting it in their pocket, there's not much of a stimulating effect for it. So I think as people learn more about what some of the details were in there, I think they saw that there were challenges with it. I think that the stuff that the governor stood for and stood up for in terms of bringing down property taxes, being able to make sure we invest in special education. Like, we need to be doing those things. Those are the same things that I will push for as governor, but we've got to push for solutions that are not 6-month solutions. They got to be for the next 6 years or the next generation. Like, that's the investment that we can make, and I think that's the opportunity that's there.
Mm-hmm. So kind of, if you were to put aside the actual substance of the negotiations of the bill, and kind of just look at the dynamics and the negotiations, the conversations, and then what caught the news headlines, what do you think that Wisconsin voters took away from that whole process, and what kind of lesson would you take into being governor from this exchange?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been a lot of discussion that the main people who negotiated the deal will all be gone next spring. The governor, the Assembly Speaker, the Senate Majority Leader, none of them will be around next year. And I think that, having other voices at the table, making sure that there are people who have that continuity of where we're going, I think those are some of the things. I think one of the important lessons is that everything that we do in this time that we're entering into, where there are going to be the thinnest of margins in the legislature, that those are things that you're going to require a strategy around who has input at the front end and how do you get these deals done at the back end. And I think that's a lesson to be had there. And I've spent a good amount of time in the last several weeks talking to some of the Democratic legislators who felt like they weren't engaged in the discussions, and they want to make sure that moving forward they're going to have a voice, they're going to have an expectation that they're going to be part of these discussions. And that's the way we're going to have to govern. And that's the way that I have approached every role that I have played. Certainly the role that I had as Secretary of Administration is one I involved people from my own party, but I also, made sure that I was doing outreach to the majority party, which was the Republicans at that time. So that's the way that I am kind of wired for governing, and that's the way that I would go about doing a deal like this. You better know what the outcome is before you enter into something. Knowing when you're going to the legislature and it's still a coin flip, I think that puts you in a challenging spot. So knowing what those where people stand and knowing that people have had some input from the beginning gives them more of a stake for what the outcome is going to be.
Mm-hmm. Transparency in governing has been a recurring theme as, kind of a response to that question, or just a wondering. Moving into a state budget year, according to projections from the Wisconsin Department of Administration, Eau Claire is actually expected to be one of Wisconsin's fastest growing counties through 2040. as governor, how would you kind of ensure that the next state budget positions growing regional economies like Eau Claire for long-term success while also meeting the needs of the state's largest metropolitan areas?
Yeah, well, I mean, part of it is these types of conversations and the work that's going on here at the chamber. And this is not my first visit here, as you know. Like, I visited when I was the Secretary of Administration. I continue to have my boots on the ground as a candidate. And I think the most important way to do this is to just ensure that there is that level of communication and that decisions are data driven. You say, I ran the Department of Administration. I trust those statistics that say that Eau Claire is amongst the top 2 or 3 growing counties over that next period, right? And I think that those are things, we've got to make sure that we are kind of leading with our strengths and leading where there is opportunity, but also with intentionality. And I know what the chamber has done over the last several years in engaging the business community here, what this means to the region and where things are going regionally. Like, all of those things should be part of ensuring that we are putting some gas in the tank in places where we know that there's going to be opportunity. Like, that's just something that if we're using relevant data, if we're using kind of where we're going, there's an old saying. I'm not much of a hockey player, but you skate to where the puck is going to be. You don't skate to where it is. You skate to where it's going. That's what Wayne Gretzky, one of the great players of all time, said. Like, that's what you have to do in state government. That's what budgets are about: is investing in those priorities, but also laying out a vision and values for what's coming down the pike. And so, being responsive and making sure that we're doing those are some things that you start to do in that budget. Now, the other thing that I'd say is this area of the state is well represented in the legislature, and you have strong voices who are going to be elevated in the legislature, and there are leaders in this community, and so I think that provides also an opportunity. Those people who I know already will be in my ear, and will make sure that the interests of this community and this region are well represented. So all of those things are how this has to work. You have to have a strong business community with a strong voice. You have to have a strong legislature. You have to have connections between there, and you have to have a governor that has a willing and responsive ear to that. The other ingredient that you have here in Eau Claire is a UW school and 3 schools here that are all doing well and all add to the regional economy as well. So making sure that you have all of those ingredients and that we're doing everything that we can to make sure they're all strong, that's part of what governing is just all about.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. Eau Claire is actually the 3rd fastest growing county in the state, behind only Dane and Trempealeau counties, actually. But so kind of looking at competing priorities, whether, as we discussed, Democrats have one chamber or both, where do you think that the state needs to make those difficult trade-offs, and how would you kind of approach these decisions and prioritize things?
Well, I mean, the trade-offs that have to be made are all going to be around how do we make this state more affordable for real people who live here. And so there are going to be trade-offs about where do we go get additional revenue. There are, in the last 4 budgets, I think Governor Evers started with medicinal marijuana legalization, and over the last 3 budgets, he has tried to get all of recreational marijuana legalized, as it is everywhere around us and in all the other states in the region. And that is an opportunity for us to take something that is an 80% issue, like 70 or 80% of the people say that that's something that they want, and we legalize it, we regulate it, we get some of the tax revenue for it. So that provides us with an opportunity for an investment. But we have to be willing to place those, to say that that's something that we're going to do, and we're going to catch up to the most of the rest of the states in the Midwest. But the trade-offs are otherwise going to be, what are we doing to make sure that we're bringing down healthcare costs for people whose premiums have skyrocketed? The fact that we have pitted taxpayers against against kids in school in the way that we're going about how we fund education. Eau Claire is the place where there's been a lawsuit filed in Eau Claire County to get the school funding formula that's been around since 1993 declared unconstitutional. And, that's going to take 3 years probably for that to make its way through the legal process. If I get elected, we're going to scrap the funding formula next year and create one that is similar to what most other states do, where we have the kid placed at the center. Every kid has value. You add on for English language learners, for special needs, for rural and urban poverty. Like, that's the way almost everybody else has done it. And we have a situation in Wisconsin where, because of this formula that's one of one around the country, 60 school districts went to referendum for operations this spring. And we are pitting property taxpayers against kids in the classroom and teachers. And that's not right. That's a Madison problem that you're feeling here in Eau Claire, and you're feeling all around this region, because there are referendum after referendum, and there is just a fatigue around those things. So we've got to make sure that we are accepting the responsibility that we have in state government for some of the challenges that local communities have, and ensuring that we're doing things that are responsive to that, because otherwise people will vote with their feet. Eau Claire is growing. We want it to keep growing. We don't want to lose people across the border to Minnesota and to other places. Like, we need to make sure that we're doing everything we can to keep people here.
Right. And supporting Eau Claire's economy and our workforce is supporting Wisconsin's economy. Business issues that we have here are business issues that they have across the state, but we would love to see the attention that we need here also. Before we move on from the state budget, I'd like to get your input. You have firsthand experience kind of building and implementing a state budget from inside the Department of Administration. And so, looking back, what is something about the budgeting process that most voters misunderstand, and how would having that experience make you a more effective governor?
Well, I mean, the thing, and people may understand this, but the governor goes through the budget line by line with a small group of people, with people who work in the state budget office, with a few of his staff, with the Secretary of Administration, with the state budget director. I was involved in that over the course of putting together two budgets. The second one was a little bit more interesting in some ways, because we did a lot of it virtually because of COVID. But we were still doing that same thing where you were going line by line through every aspect of the budget. And that it is a values statement as much as it is an economic statement about where the state is going. And so, there are opportunities for and vehicles for getting input. And to be honest, one of the things that's been informed by my time with Governor Evers, and I think we can even do better on, is the transparency around that, ensuring that we're doing budget listening sessions all around the state, that we're doing it not just at times where we expect that 9 to 5 workers can be part of the conversation, but are we doing things where people who might be non-traditional workers have opportunity there? Like, those are the types of things. I have outlined plans for us to be able to get input, whether it's through a website that everybody has access to or something physically that gets mailed out to people around the state. It's like giving people some real input, because you need to build that from the ground up, and you need to get as much input from people as possible. And I think ultimately the final product is better if you have a transparent process to do it. There are, I think there are candidates who have gotten criticized for saying, well, they're going to go behind a curtain and do some of these things. Like, I think we can't afford to do things that way. We need to do it in order for people to respect the process, respect the outcome. They need to know exactly how this is being handled.
Right. Yeah. So something also that we've kind of touched on is workforce, and making Wisconsin an attractive place for businesses to move, but also expand and stay. So this has been Wisconsin's competitiveness is super important to us here at the Chamber, but also I'm sure across Wisconsin. Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce recently published a report that concluded that between 2010 and 2020, Wisconsin lost 58,000 residents under 18 years old, and this trend is continuing. From 2020 to 2024 alone, the same population fell by an additional 40,000. If this trend continues, Wisconsin is on track to lose 95,000 young people in this decade, roughly the same population as Kenosha. Wisconsin has an aging population as well, and a shrinking youth coupled to make difficult challenges for manufacturing, construction, and healthcare industries, just to name a few. So in your view, what role does the state government play in increasing Wisconsin's competitiveness from a workforce standpoint?
It is one of the most important roles that the state can play, and it has a number of different layers. One of the challenges that we have had is, for about a decade, the state legislature decided decided to stop investing in higher ed in the state of Wisconsin, especially in the UW system. And I think part of what we're seeing is we are bearing the fruits of that. They are the campuses, and Eau Claire is certainly an example of it. They are engines for innovation. When students go there, they stay there largely. They stay in communities. I think you're a reflection of that.
Yep.
Somebody who went to the UW system and now is back here and is going to do work here. Like, those are the things that we can do. So it's about making sure you're doing everything, having a strong K-12 system, having a strong technical education system, and opportunities for people to go directly into the workforce, but also investing in those engines of opportunity that are the UW system schools. So like the governor and the state have an absolute role to play in that. It's one of the most determinant roles that we can play about where a state is going to go. And we've already talked about some of the other building blocks that can keep people here. You provide a viable place for them to get a good job. Then you have communities where they can afford to buy a home, where they can invest, where they can build for the long term. Like, all those building blocks are in place. Make sure that the health care that they're paying is not something that's going to push them out of Wisconsin. Like, all of those things are part of the building blocks and the infrastructure for economic development and workforce development. Now, there are, we haven't talked about it yet, but the coming disruption around AI and the anxiety around there, like, there are things we're going to need to do to make sure we are dealing directly with workforce on there. I had a conversation with a guy just in the last few days, and he's a computer programmer. He thinks he's got 5 or 6 years, but he's not even, he's young, but not that young anymore. He's in his mid-30s, and he said, I'm going to be 42 years old, and I may not have an opportunity again. And so, what is there for me to do? And we need to know, we need to be able to lay out a pathway so that people like that have opportunity to get retrained, or whether it's micro credentials that we can do through some of the schools, whether it's the retraining that's necessary by employers. Now, like, the state can and must play a role in all of those things, because there is a disruption coming that's similar to some of those we have seen in the last 100 years, and I think with all those disruptions, there are those who are going to be able to get the peaks, and there are going to be absolute valleys. Our opportunity, our responsibility as a state, is to fill in those valleys, make sure that as many people as possible can have access to those peaks, and use that as a way for us to continue to springboard the economy. There are other things that Wisconsin has the opportunity to win out on the weather here and climate. As things become less tolerable in other places in the country and other places around the world, Wisconsin becomes much more attractive. I don't think that's a long-term strategy. I think we better fix what's ailing us globally. But for the near term, there are opportunities for Wisconsin because of that. And we can have, if we've got the other building blocks in place, there are things that we can demonstrate that we can do in the next 15 years we haven't been able to do for the last 15.
Yeah, and those partnerships that you mentioned too, the micro credentials as well, like, those partnerships are absolutely crucial, and that's sort of what we do on a smaller scale here at the Eau Claire Chamber. And so seeing that be implemented at the state level would be enormous.
Well, and I had there was a federal grant that we got when I was working at the Greater Milwaukee Committee through the Higher Education Regional Alliance. This is in southeastern Wisconsin. It's the 18 higher ed institutions in the 6 or 7 counties, and there was $1.5 million federal grant that we got, and it was all for micro credentials and getting people. And we used the infrastructure that was available. We used all the schools there, whether it was UW Milwaukee or Milwaukee School of Engineering, Waukesha County Technical College, a whole host of schools, in order to use these and to leverage those funds. I think that's where government can play a role. It need not always be the state government. There's federal opportunities, but we also know some of those federal opportunities are less than where they were a few years ago. But there's opportunities for us to do that. And in a lot of ways, the collaborative nature amongst education, the collaborative nature amongst higher ed, whether you're a technical school, whether a university, private or public, I think that offers opportunities. And and you've got one of each here in the Eau Claire area and in the Chippewa Valley that I think that you can provide lots of opportunity and lots of ability to coordinate and collaborate.
Yeah, and super exciting. Our 900 district just announced that a nursing collaboration between CVTC and UW Eau Claire would be taking place as well. So that's a great way to kind of work that in too. So kind of staying on Wisconsin's competitiveness and creating a welcoming environment for business. Wisconsin has the 8th highest property taxes and is the 13th most regulated state, according to the same WMC study. When it comes to healthcare costs, regulations, and taxes altogether, this makes for a challenging environment to sell those who might be eyeing Wisconsin for their business. As governor, how would you ensure that Wisconsin is an attractive place for business, and do you see any room for shifting any of these regulations or property taxes as well?
One, on the property taxes, the biggest thing, and I've already brought it up, is the school funding is broken in Wisconsin, and it is something that is driving up property taxes all around the state, especially through referendums. And if we can fix that at the state level, automatically you're going to drive down local property taxes. So the state historically, or for some periods, has taken on 2/3 of the school funding as their responsibility. Right now, maybe it's in the high 40s or something like that. If we were to move towards that, and as I talk about, a new school funding formula, having the state take up that responsibility, reassume that responsibility for 2/3, immediately you're going to see some dramatic reductions in property taxes and an end to what has happened over the last decade plus, which is, pitting local property taxpayers against kids and teachers in schools. So providing that opportunity will drive down some of those, the local taxes, and it'll make opportunities for, additional investment at the local level. So that is something that I think we can work on immediately. When it comes to regulation, I am absolutely somebody who wants to make government work, and having over-regulation and having things where that stifles growth. I think that's something that we should always be looking at. And I'm somebody who, in the course of doing my job as the Secretary of Administration, had to find ways to save money. I go back to the first weeks of COVID when we didn't know what was going on. There was this huge disruption. The governor came to me and said, "Hey, it's the end of the budget year. The budget year ends in June, and we were then in March or early April." And he said, "But you got to go find 5% savings across the board in the first year of the budget." It was about $70 million. I gathered all of the agency heads, the UW system, everybody, and said, "Okay, this is what we got to do. What can you do for us?" And and we went around, and I can guarantee I wasn't the most popular person in Madison at that time, but we got it done. And then in the first months of the next budget year, we cut another $200 million. This is what you have to do if you're going to be responsible. We cut $250 million out of that at a time where it was people were doing the same thing around their own kitchen table. That's the responsible path. Now, things ultimately got a little better, and we came out of COVID in some ways stronger than we had gone in financially, but you had to do and had to take some of those steps during that time. And I think you got to do that during crisis times. You also got to do it during regular times. And so that's the approach that I would take to everything when it comes to governing.
Yeah, and I appreciate your kind of realistic, level-headed approach, because talking about a lot of the difficult trade-offs that you need to kind of make to have a stable state, it's kind of what makes people uncomfortable. But also your emphasis on education. Eau Claire School District actually has a $10.5 million budget deficit heading into next year. So that is definitely a prevalent issue in Eau Claire as well. So
yeah, and on the larger scale, one of the challenges that we have with government in general, but the Democrats have a bigger challenge is we're not trusted. You see national and even Wisconsin state polling where government is not high on the level of trust, and Democrats are even lower sometimes. So we've got to be able to demonstrate that we're going to, say what we're going to do, be able to be responsive on these issues, and demonstrate that we can actually get stuff done. That's pretty simple. Like if we can't do that and we win a small majority in the legislature or win the race for governor this year, we're going to have a very short time in that majority. We better be able to demonstrate that it's about effectiveness. And that's why, again, I am not running for this office because I'm holding a grudge against somebody and I want to get even with them. Like there are plenty of reasons for people to be angry. Some people are angry at somebody, but they're more angry at their own circumstance and the fact that they're having to decide between paying for rent or paying for their prescription drugs or their utility bill or their mortgage. Like that's what is angering them, and they want government to at least provide some pathway to a solution for them. That's what we should be about.
Yeah, absolutely. Wisconsin actually places first for medical payments for workers' compensation of 36 states in that same WMC study I referred to. Compared to neighboring states, Wisconsin's medical payments are between 9% and 28% higher than neighboring states Illinois, Indiana, and Iowa. The government regulates many aspects of workers' compensation besides on the billing side. Do you see a realistic solution to this issue, as a lot of Eau Claire businesses and Chippewa Valley businesses are struggling to pay these costs?
No, I think it's about certainly it's about workers' comp, but it's about every other issue as well. Like if we can do what we need to do around workforce, if we can create the rest of the environment where there is a pipeline that's heading into meeting the needs of employers, if we can bring down overall healthcare costs for businesses, which is writ large one of the biggest expenses that they have, and something that Wisconsin also hasn't compared favorably to others in the Midwest or others nationally. Like if we can set that kind of a climate, then we're going to make strides, and then you're going to see businesses continue to grow here. Like, there are a couple different schools of thought about how you grow economically. And, I had to, in the first year of my work with Governor Evers, one of my biggest jobs was to take the Foxconn deal and try to figure out, was there any there? Like, we had inherited that from the Walker administration. It was $3 billion that was going to be paid out, and there was supposed to be, 13,000 jobs and 20 million square feet that was going to start in Racine County in southeastern Wisconsin. And many people thought that the governor wanted to kill this. I think what the governor wanted and what he asked me to do was to find out what was actually happening there. And we came to find out pretty quickly that they had changed lots of plans, but even the philosophy there was, let's find somebody from somewhere else and let's do everything we can to bring them here. Like, I think what's going to happen here in Eau Claire, the growth here is going to be from existing companies. It's going to be from entrepreneurs. It's going to be from spinoff and things that come out of the UW and come out of, innovators and founders of companies here. Like, growing your own oftentimes is so much more effective, so much less expensive than trying to find someone from somewhere else and throwing everything you can at them to bring them here. If we can grow our own talent, if we can grow our own business, if we can continue to invest in the things that have been here, and made this community strong for the last 50 years, the next 50 years can be even better. So it really is about all of these things as a whole.
Right. Talking about kind of Wisconsin's competitiveness still, but also investing in community and stimulating that economic growth. A necessary part of the conversation, especially here, is data centers. So in the past, you've stated that tech companies tend to move too fast and hinder communities' ability to provide feedback. Transparency is, of course, crucial, yet technology advances quickly. You've argued that the government's role in this process is to slow the companies down throughout and rather provide transparency, accountability, community engagement, and coordination with communities that will feel this impact. Recently, Xcel Energy filed a proposal for transparent rules establishing that any new large electric customers pay 100% of the costs needed to serve them, meaning that any new large data centers would not raise the bills of any companies currently or future customers. So as a proponent for economic development, what is the ideal scenario when it comes to engaging with a potential data center, or like the ideal set of facts, sort of?
Yeah, actually, I think the ideal is to set up guardrails that everybody knows kind of where those are. Make sure that everybody knows what the bar is when it comes to data centers. And I'll tell you, that when the governor and the legislature passed the tax credit that kind of put us on the map for data centers a few years ago, the fact that they did nothing else and put none of those guardrails up, it put huge stress on local government. It put stress on, the unions that are supporting these things and the others who are advocates for it. And I think we need to make sure that there are very clear lines of delineation, and that's the state's responsibility. Number one, make sure that you and I and nobody else are paying for the construction, the operation, the transmission, the ultimate retirement of these. So, that's absolute. That's number one. Number two, make sure that we're meeting the environmental needs of Wisconsin. This is a beautiful part of the state, and there are challenges that we have all over the state in making sure that we have clean water and clean air. So, making sure that whether it's the environmental regulations need to be met, that there is a significant portion of the energy that's being created through renewable energy. So we're continuing to move along that path. That's number two. So environmentally, number two. Number one, making sure nobody else pays for it. Number three, if these things are going to be built, I want them built by Wisconsin union labor. I think we need to make sure we're doing that for the long term. And finally, and this is very important, and I think this is where a lot of the stress has come and a lot of the anger has come around the state. We can never have any non-disclosure agreements anymore. We need to make sure that there is a pipeline and a pathway for local residents and local communities to have a clear stake in deciding whether these things are going to happen. Some communities are going to decide that they will, some won't. In DeForest, they said no. In Caledonia, they said no. In Greenleaf, they said not here. But there are other communities that are going to embrace this. As long as there is a level that everybody knows they're going to reach and there is a transparency around it, that will be ultimately what happens. I think that's what we need. That's not going to make everybody happy, but it is something that will make the ground rules clear and the guardrails clear for everybody who's involved in this. And it will take some of the burden off of local government. Who amongst us, when the state has been starving local governments, in the last couple of years, if somebody's coming with bags full of money and say, hey, we've got a great idea for you, there is a lot of incentive to go along with that.
Right.
And the state has kind of left the locals hanging on that. And we need for there to be some of those things. It is unfortunate that the state legislature has done nothing on this. There are legislators. I think there's a bill that a couple of Democrats have pushed, and a lot of Democrats have been supported, that had a lot of engagement from all kinds of stakeholders that went through 12 drafts. It's, I think it's just about ready to go. Mm-hmm. And so in the opening months, in the first 100 days of the next legislative session, we should be able to pass that, and we should be able to make sure that there are clear guidelines that everybody knows moving forward. That's something that state government should be able to do that we haven't been able to see in the last few years.
Right. So a follow-up question I would have for that is that it seems that everyone in the Democratic gubernatorial primary race is in favor of regulations in order to support any kind of potential data center proposal. And so something that I would be curious about is the realistic timeline on those regulations. You mentioned that, that you would be able to, it would be introduced and passed pretty much immediately when the session begins. I'm curious if you would foresee any kind of that would divert any potential data center companies from looking at Wisconsin as an option for economic growth, and if passing it immediately is a super realistic timeline for us to look at?
Well, again, I mentioned that there is existing legislation that's out there. I've talked to the authors of it, and I am confident that there has been huge stakeholder engagement in that already. And there may be a few things to tie up with that, but I think that is something that we should absolutely be able to do. And if you're paying attention, you don't have to have your ear very close to the ground to know that data centers is one of the defining issues around the state right now.
Absolutely.
And so if we're going to demonstrate that we're going to be responsive to that, that better be something that's on that's on the board from day one. And it would be for me. And, so again, part of being governor is about setting the tone about, there are things that have controversy around them. Should we wait on those, or should we do those right now? We better be in a position where we're ready to take on some of these things, and to know that even the outcome isn't going to make everybody happy. I would love to be on the side of the 80% issue all the time. I'm running for governor because there are 51, 49% represent issues where I have a passionate interest and I think we can take Wisconsin in a different direction. If I need to pull some people, drag some people over that finish line, I think that's what the job is. Like, that's how you do it. And I think that's how you get stuff done, and you recreate and reestablish for people a belief that government, while it doesn't solve every problem, that there are some things that government has to work for, and we're in a position to make that happen. Like, that's absolutely why I want the job. That's what I've tried to demonstrate throughout the course of my career, and that's who I'm going to continue to be as governor.
Yeah. And at the chamber, we encourage our community, but also the state, if we have any impact on having these conversations and being open to them. Communities across Wisconsin have sometimes shut down the conversations completely before they've even started. And right now, the revenue is what a lot of these municipalities need to seriously consider. And so hearing that you're open to like the conversations and the potential to sit down is refreshing as a candidate.
Well, and I think, I'll tell you, I think that as an advocacy organization, I've said this everywhere that I have gone around the state, because I've worked in lobbying and I have friends who do advocacy. Sometimes lobbyists get a bad name. Like, there are people who lobby for all kinds of different stuff, for a lot of issues around, advocacy for older residents of our state, or for young kids who need childcare. Like, there are people who do lots of that. And I think that the next few years for advocacy groups could be amongst the most interesting and most fruitful, because, when you don't have, for the last 15 years, a lot of what happened or didn't happen in the legislature had to do with one person, and that's Robin Vos, the Speaker of the Assembly. And now we're going to be in a position where government may be a little messier, but there's opportunities. If you have a strong argument, if you're able to organize people, if you can get an ally from here and an ally from there, and sometimes in a bipartisan fashion, you're going to be able to get something done where you might have been stonewalled for the last 15 years. So I think it is absolutely a time where it should be exciting for people on advocacy, and their government works well when you've got strong advocates, a strong legislative branch, a strong executive branch. Like, all of those things in place is a recipe for us getting stuff done, and we should be pushing each other all to get that done.
Mm-hmm. Before we wrap up, is there anything that you would like our listeners, if they could take one thing away from your campaign and from your candidacy, what would that be?
I'd like them to take away that I am a realistic, passionate, pragmatic progressive. And I think that's what most of us are in Wisconsin. I grew up as the 10th of 11 kids. Relationships have been a part of my life from the beginning, and they have, throughout a 35-year career, they have been hugely important to me. I would want people in this part of the state and people in the state overall to know that I think what they deserve, what we need out of government, is not the vengeance and grievance and let's get even aspect that I think we have seen and we see far too much of at the federal level. Wisconsin's motto is forward. How do we continue to push ourselves there? And that's what I have been throughout the course of my life and my career. I've been a problem solver. This is not, for me, about winning and, this kind of a belief that it's time to win and, then rub somebody's nose in it. Like, that's not, let's celebrate that our success. Let's wrestle over who gets the credit, but let's get something done. That's fine. That is actually a great way to approach things, where we're fighting over who gets the credit, because that means that something's gotten done. That's who I've tried to be, and that's the course of action I'm going to try to take as governor.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again for taking the time to cover these important issues with me and share your perspective on the issues facing our community. We appreciate your willingness to engage and discuss these issues facing our region. Be sure to check out other candidate interviews on this playlist and visit the Eau Claire Area Chamber of Commerce website for additional voting and candidate information and resources related to this election. Thanks again to our media sponsor, Home Tech by Mosaic, and thanks for listening.